You're listening to Lead to Soar, bringing women the best career advice and mentorship from around the world. Lead to Soar is a production of A Career That Soars. Learn more at leadtosoar.com.
The Lead to Soar podcast is recorded on the ancestral home of the Ho-Chunk Nation in Madison, Wisconsin, USA, and on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in Melbourne, Australia. We pay our respects to the traditional custodians of these lands and their elders past and present, and welcome any First Nations people listening today, wherever you are. Hello, listeners. It's Michelle here with two special, they are very special to me, two special guests. You normally hear from Mel. She's with me on Lead to Soar as well. And we've also got the amazing Susan Colantuno. Welcome, friends.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be here. It's been a while since we recorded, so I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. I've been having withdrawal symptoms. We've all been the big B word in the last couple of months, busy, or as I like to say, living full and fulfilling lives. And we've been drifting along, relying on our own career network, A Career That Soars, and text messages and WhatsApps and emails to stay in contact. So this is a real treat. And today we've decided to not only just get together and let you, or allow you to have a peek inside the conversations we have, but we're going to think out loud together, because we've got a couple of different topics that have been, popping up over the last few months that we figure would be good to tease out our own thoughts about, and particularly in the context of what these things mean for women, work, careers, and leadership. So, and really, this is our last episode for 2022. OMG, where did 2022 go? We'd love to leave you with a whole bunch of reflections, but you know what? It's been such a big year that would mean this would be a 2-hour episode. So we're just going to go see you later at the end, and happy 2022, and away we go. But Susan and Mel, the first topic that I'd love to hear your thoughts on, and I was a bit ranty about this subject earlier in this week that we're recording in A Career That Soars and on social media, was about the Queen Bee. And what got my eyes rolling and me heaving very, very deep sighs was an article by an Australian, she's quite a significant woman here in Australia, Jamila Rizvi, and she wrote an article that says an opinion piece that says, yes, sometimes women are sexist too, but let's look a little deeper. And the premise of the article is that, we hold women to a different account, and we hear lots and lots of stuff about those nasty women who have sharp elbows. They are the queen bee. They lock other women out, so on and so forth. So I did, as I said, I heaved a great sigh and I went, here we go again. Wrote a very short, snappy social media post, then went, actually, I need to demonstrate that I've given a little bit more thought to this. But my premise was, you know what? Women are assholes too, and that's okay. So over to you. I really want to discuss the queen bee syndrome, which just keeps coming up over and over again. Susan, thoughts?
Well, I have two thoughts right off the bat. One is, do you know that the queen bee syndrome has been written about since the 70s?
What else happened? What else happened in the 70s, Susan?
Women started opening doors and wanting and aspiring to careers. And it's been around for a very long time. And it really pisses me off that it persists as a concept. But it's understandable in the context. So that was my first thought, was, holy cow, as you did, I'm tired of this, and can't we just get over it? The second one was women being sexist. And I always associate sexism and racism as a manifestation of the in power group. So are we sexist if we don't like other women that we work with?
That's a good angle. Mel, what do you think?
Oh man, I have a lot of thoughts on this. So I grew up in, let's just call it like it is. I grew up in Texas, where it is a very patriarchal culture. A lot of it stems from white Christianity, white Christian nationalism. And so if we can come to the conclusion that people of all genders can be indoctrinated into these mindsets where women are lesser, even if they're not using that language, they are believing that in their minds and in how they treat people, etc., then I think, yes, women can be sexist too. They're probably not aware of it when it's happening, but yeah, I think sexism can be on all sides, so to speak.
So I like the point, or appreciate the point that you've made, Susan, about the dominant group, and the dominant, if the dominant group is, let's say, that section of society that you've just described, so white, Christian, or Christian, Judeo-Christian background and what have you. Yeah, I guess that sexism or that dislike or inequity expressed towards other women could play out, particularly if they're women of colour or non-white. But I guess without, I kind of don't typically go down that track when I have, because I've got to say, every time I speak on a panel, particularly to women's groups around career advice and things like that, I invariably get a question about, well, women aren't nice to other women, and I don't like working for women, and I prefer to work for men, not women. And my first reaction is, well, that's your internalized patriarchy. That's because we've been conditioned to hear the voices of men as authoritative, see men as power figures, and we have expected to see women in roles that are stereotypically, caring, nurturing, team player, blah, 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 blah. So that's the first thing. And then, for the second thing is, as I said, men don't support other men. Not all men, I should say. Not all men support all other men. Men can be assholes, so why can't women be assholes too? And
well, this is a whole can of worms, right? Because I don't think we're here to advocate for any of our listeners to be assholes, right? Like, that's not the world we're trying to build here. I think your point is well taken, though, that the queen bee syndrome is a sexist sort of idea in and of itself, because there is not an analog for men. However, we can also acknowledge that there are times when women behave in ways that we wish were different in the context of supporting women in the workplace. And that is true of men as well. So maybe where we end up with this is emphasizing the behavior that we are trying to get away from, and acknowledging that bad behavior comes about in people of all genders.
I think, build on that, Susan, because I've got a very strong view about that.
Oh, okay. Well, I have strong views about so much that we've been talking about, as always. But I wanted to also advocate for the behaviors that we want to encourage. And as I was thinking about this, it reminded me of a quote from Gail Evans, who was CNN, which is a cable network here in the U.S. She was the first woman executive vice president. She said, And this is something that's talked about in that article you referenced, Michelle. Women have also been hesitant to give special treatment to other women for fear of being seen as someone who favors women. Singling out one individual for special attention can fly in the face of our image of ourselves as fair, objective people who don't play favorites. But the guys mentor young men all the time, and we all see it. That's not part of her quote. The quote continues, "We all know who the boss's favorite is and that he'll do anything he can for him. In fact, it's considered somewhat unusual if the boss doesn't have a protege." And she goes on to make the point that we all have to play on the women's team. Even if another woman gets a job we want, it's opening up pathways for us and other women. So that thing about behaving in ways that are constructive for women in general, playing on the women's team is part of that.
Yes, absolutely. And there's some research that was done on the side of sponsorship. And for our listeners, I'm delineating mentorship from sponsorship here. So I'm not talking about mentorship in the sense of spending one-on-one time with someone and sharing knowledge and helping someone develop. I'm talking about sponsorship in the sense of when a senior person becomes an advocate for a junior level person. So you can hear more about what I'm about to describe in the HBR Women at Work podcast episode titled Sponsorship, Defining the Relationship. And what the research showed is essentially that senior men are more effective sponsors than senior women. More effective in the sense that men are typically seen as the authority figures. We default to accepting men's recommendations in general, right? This is a generalization. And people are internally aware of this. So that senior woman, although she may have made it to a very senior level position, she may understand that she does not have the clout or the respect within the organization to be an effective sponsor. Or she might be concerned that she doesn't have enough respect or clout to be an effective sponsor for a junior woman. And so knowing those dynamics are at play, I think that helps us understand as we're trying to move up a ladder that we cannot simply rely on someone who looks like us to help shepherd us up the chain. And that's part of why this podcast is so important in speaking to leaders. We need men to step up to the plate when it comes to advocating for and sponsoring women.
Or building on that, advocating for the woman's voice, the senior woman's voice who's in the room. And if you think about the Carla Harris TED Talk, who's that person who's banging the table on your behalf in the rooms that you're not on. So if I am banging the table for my protege, for the person that I'm sponsoring and putting my social and political capital on the line for, I want my peers to recognise that my voice may not, because I'm a woman, may not carry as much authority for my protege as others. So I think, again, that's a really good call to action for male leaders to step in behind their colleagues, their female colleagues. Where I was getting excited before about though was, and look, we talk about this a lot, but interestingly, I was delivering some content yesterday, which my friend Susan here inspired me to deliver, which is around confidence, the C word, and confidence is built on competence, of course. But one of the pieces of advice that I was sharing with the team, the group that I was presenting to, was that these things are rarely seen as a system issue. They are seen as an individual woman's issue. Now, whether that's a lack of confidence, whether it's a lack of authority around that table, whether it's a behavioural trait, queen bee or otherwise. This is often, it's brought in as a woman, the individual woman's issue, rather than what I am trying to indicate my frustration at the system, which is fundamentally stacked against women, because we hold women in general to a higher set of behavioural standards than others. And at a system level, so for leaders listening in your organisation, how might that play out? And that's what I really want people to look at. How do the voices of women or the behaviours of women, how are they judged more harshly than the voices and the behaviours of men in your workplace? And gee whiz, when you start to look through this lens, you can't unsee some of this stuff. 75% of feedback given to women is subjective and about personal stuff, about personality, whereas men get mentored, coached, taught, and given feedback about their impact on the business and less about their behaviour. So we really have to ask all of us, when we go to criticise or provide critical feedback, number one, is it gendered? If yes, don't give it and give some better feedback. And that includes, I think, circling back to where, both of you were saying is, am I judging her harshly for not being on the women's team, or is she on the women's team but she's actually being more subtle about it? Because she doesn't want to appear, to your point, Susan, doesn't want to appear to be that person, rightly or wrongly, who's on the women's team flying the flag, and she's unfair because she only advocates for women. It's a really tough one, but it's a system issue.
A related dynamic like that came up in the article about Queen Bee is the expectation of women to be nice. So that's a behavioral set that generally has to do with being empathetic and having high emotional EQ. And when women step out of that box that we get put into, the systemic expectations of what's acceptable behavior for women, we suffer because both women and men have that expectation of us. So this is, again, building on what you're saying, and where Mel was headed, that for leaders to be sensitive of the expectations they have. I wanted to go somewhere else with that. This will require a bit of editing, sorry. The be nice thing. Two things. So when it comes to this expectation that women are nice, we women, because we've internalized that for ourselves, many of us, when we see another woman who's not doing that, we can treat her poorly. And I think that's part of this whole Queen Bee syndrome. An interesting thing that just popped up today was some research written about in Harvard Business Review about a study that again affirms that women are expected to be nice, but it tied some interesting, not real world studies about the impact on equity in monetary compensation. And in these studies that, again, they aren't real world, but they were fascinating to me. Women and men both expected the women to be nicer when it came to dispersing monetary rewards, but in fact, in the experiments that were done, women and men were equally nice. So I thought that was kind of interesting and unexpected. And one other thing I want to say, I can't tell you how many times I've heard from executives, so leaders, put on your listening hat here, the phrase or something similar to this phrase: she's nice, but can she be effective? So we're expected to be nice, and that's expected to be incompatible with being an effective business person. And boy, do we get hammered by that. And I think that comes more from senior women and men than it does from colleagues who might be offended by our lack of niceness when we're making business decisions.
Yeah, hashtag double bind for sure.
100%, 100%. And, let me go straight to our 3-part leadership definition. Engaging the greatness in others. So engaging the hearts, the minds, and the efforts of others. So really seeking out, who they are. And being nice, having really strong interpersonal skills, reading the room, being politically savvy, and then, aligning those people towards the goal, towards the strategic and financial goals of the organisation. And I've got to say, my beautiful Nana, God rest her soul, Vale Kath, would always say, Michelle, you catch more bees with honey than you do with vinegar.
My mother.
Yeah.
The same. Oh,
so,
goodness.
And I've got to say, being nice versus being an asshole has kind of worked for me. And I'm going to tell you, I've a fair dose of asshole in me too. But, as a leader, it's about showing up and being able to, frankly, get people to do the stuff that's going to take the business forward. And for those of you who've worked for an authoritarian, autocratical dictator who doesn't give two hoots about you, couldn't care what they are, versus someone who actually gets you and is bringing out your greatness and gives you great vision, lets you go and what have you, who do you want to work for? And who are you going to do your best work for? So anyway, we've kind of, as we do, gone down some rabbit holes here. But I think for me the real call to action here is look at this as a system issue. The next time you think, wow, she's not a good woman because she's not a team player for women, pardon me, think about, is this a system issue or is this a her issue? Is this my internalized view about how women should be, or am I really, really judging her the same? And I've got to say, I have in times where I've been a little bit tired and less tolerant, more grumpy, snapped back at people to say, well, would you hold a man? Would you say that about a man? And people go, oh, yeah, oh, maybe. Yeah, no, I don't think you would. But anyway. So there you go, the queen bee.
You're listening to Lead to Soar, a production of A Career That Soars. A Career That Soars, or ACTS, is an organization, a networking platform, and a place for career women to learn and connect. Our founder, Susan Colantuno, envisioned a group that would embrace women from all backgrounds and support one another towards achieving their highest career ambitions. Learn more about what you can get from ACTS by visiting leadtosoar.com and clicking the ACTS link.
I did have one other thing I wanted to talk about in relation to the queen bee. One of the points in the article was that one of the factors that women get pegged with, why women get pegged with the queen bee tag, is that we behave like we're not like the others, that we're not like all women. And because I have a long view, being the elder stateswoman of this group, actually that worked for women pioneers that allying themselves with men was the only way to get a foot in the door. Now, today, that might also be necessary in certain industries that are extremely anti-women in their culture. And I can think of a few, but I'm not going to name them. Construction and technology. Have any of you seen the new work requirements that came out today for Twitter? You have to be hardcore and work long days and all of this other stuff that's very gender biased. Anyway, so in certain other industries, it's much easier for women to be who we are in the full range of who we are. But that thing about, I'm not like other women. Yeah, I'm not like other women in the sense that I care more about my career than I do about the color of nail polish that I'm wearing. That's a fact of life for me. But going back to, I want to go back to something you said earlier, Mel, because it was so spot on. The internalized misogyny and patriarchy that might make a woman feel that she's worthy, but other women generally aren't, is really dysfunctional.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was just going to build on that, something to that effect, because that is a mindset that I feel was very strong in the area where I grew up, the geography where I grew up. It's almost something that you see women take on boastfully, including I've seen it in spaces like engineering. Like, I'm different. I'm not like other women, and it's so destructive. What does that say about how that person thinks and believes internally about about women? I don't know. It's almost like a unrecognized self-loathing that's happening. And it's because the culture gives us these ideas. Our culture, the society, media infiltrate these ideas around you're not worthy or valuable as a person unless you fit into, these boxes that we've set out for you or whatever. This has so many layers to it. So
it absolutely does. And I would feel duplicitous though if I didn't make a confession right now, because that was me in my 30s. In my 30s, my career was accelerating. I was because I was a manager and leader, I was in male-dominated environments. I was in particularly the construction side of the telco that I worked for. And I would say things like, I prefer to hang around with the guys. And I've written about the fact that I could work harder, drink harder, swear harder, still swear harder, play harder than any of the boys. I ran with the boys and I assimilated. I wouldn't have been able to put words like I'm assimilating to advance my career in front of me. But inherently I knew that I didn't fly my feminist flag in those years because I needed to look like them, sound like them, behave like them so that I could be trusted to, oh yeah, she's one of us, she's one of the boys, we'll give her a leg up. Where I deviated from some of the other behaviour that I have observed, which is the conquest or the little sister. You're either a sexual conquest or you're the little sister to the big brothers. So I certainly didn't subscribe to either one of those for whatever reason. But yeah, I confess that was me. And I had a rude awakening.
And it had to be because at that time, and I can totally identify with what you're saying, but at that time, the box that Mel just talked about didn't include the idea of woman as businesswoman, career oriented. So how can you it almost required jumping out of the box in order to come back and reshape the box.
Oh,
Okay,
absolutely.
I want to add a comment, and before I do, I want to say, dear listeners, we're welcoming Amal joining us in the discussion. Welcome, Amal.
Hey, Amal. But before you do, Mel, I just want to make one final comment on that. That behaviour did me enormous harm. So
Say more.
It was harmful to me. It was harmful to my psyche, my emotions. And I think eventually, had I not had a couple of matters that occurred in my whole life that caused me to stop, breathe, and reflect on who the fuck I was. Sorry, we're going to have to, bleep that out. No, don't bleep it out. But really make me stop and think who the hell I was and how was I going to live the rest of my life. I would not have progressed in my career. I would not have. I can guarantee, because I wouldn't have been seen as real, genuine, the A word, authentic. Because I was occupying a persona, and I was not bringing my best self for myself or for the people that I led. So, yeah. So this does harm. And again, if you're an individual who feels like she has to assimilate, we want to help you. But let's look at this at a system level. This is why diversity, inclusion, equity is so important, because we don't want assimilation. We want everyone to bring their brilliance so that we can tap into it, not have them all behave the same way. Back to you, Mel, and we'll let Amal sort herself out from a sound perspective.
Yeah, okay. I was just going to add that the timeline around women's advancement is interesting here. So Susan mentioned that sort of coping mechanism was effective for women who were trailblazing. And there are some industries where women have reached some sort of parity, probably not at the executive level, but some sort of parity within an industry. But there are other industries like engineering and construction, and certainly trades, electricians and water and wastewater treatment plant operators, et cetera, where the gender skew is still, for water treatment plant operators, for example, it's still like 96% men. And so I can understand how this coping mechanism comes in at the front of it. And I just this is a little bit deviating, but I just had this situation recently that illustrated for me how we've come maybe a long way in the last few decades and how far we still have to go. So I'll add this in because it does have to do with me reflecting on this last year. So one of the things that I have worked on this last year is getting my parents moved closer to me. They are elderly, they need help, they need to be close to family. So I've been working this year to get them moved close to me. They're close to me now, and now we're going through all of these processes of getting paperwork lined up and that sort of thing. So I'm working with my mom the other day on some documentation, and we got to one of those things online where you've got to fill out the security questions. You pick a security question and then have an answer. And I picked out the question, the first car that you owned. And my mom turns to me and she says, well, the Subaru is the first car that I've ever owned. And that's the car she drives today. Before the car that she drives today, a 2019 Subaru or whatever it is, she's not owned a car.
Mm-hmm.
I was completely floored. So to bring this around full circle, there are different generations of women at work, and some of the women who are amongst us who have been the trailblazers, they they are an older generation who were the trailblazers in their fields. I'm thinking of someone in engineering specifically. Their behavior can be rooted in how they had to survive to get to where they are today.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so trailblazing isn't done. There are still women in certain industries and or within certain companies within certain industries. And I think who are trailblazing. And I think it's really important for us to give grace to the trailblazers, because sometimes aligning themselves to some extent with the way men are doing business is the only way to not get seen as, going back to something Michelle said, sex object, little sister, or job nun, or work wife. And I have felt that the importance of that for a very long time, and people sometimes don't recognize what you were just saying, Mel, that there isn't one course of women's advancement. It is very differentiated by industry and by companies within industries, and it's important to acknowledge that. So I'm glad you made that point.
Hear, hear. Amal, welcome, and give us your thoughts around. Well, you've picked up the thread, no doubt, but over to you.
Thank you. So it took me a minute to think about, like, at least my experiences, right, or my mom's experiences. I would say maybe that's closer to the shock. Is that my mom has always said that she aligned herself with males more than females because she felt that the women were backstabbing or were going to talk you. They were not focused really on the business, and it was more of a popularity contest for them. And that was interesting to me to think through, because I don't know that that's the case, at least for me, or at least my experiences. But I don't know. Like, my assumption has always been that as a woman, you are trying to get the job done. You're not really thinking about, I'm a male versus female. You are trying to do your best to be worthy and to be seen as somebody who's efficient and who will get the job done and who's focused on the business. And then I think alignment just comes from who's around you. What I've heard women say is, I've worked really hard to get here. She needs to work as hard. Right? And I'm like, well, you paved the way. Do I really need to work hard? Like, you should have done it for us, right? So I think it's just looking at it from a different perspective, but realizing that as women, maybe we shouldn't see each other as competition, right? You do have, you should pave the way, and why not? And that is, you owe me that much, at least, is to try and break those ceilings and open the doors for other women. And then when they come, open the door and welcome them in, versus pushing the door to say, well, now you need to push it a little bit harder to get it open for yourself.
Mm. And I do appreciate the point around the mindset, and it is still there. And interestingly, I have the mindset that I just want to make that pathway after me as smooth, glassy smooth as possible for every woman, no matter what generation she's in. And I don't subscribe, well, I shouldn't say clearly, but I don't subscribe to the fact that because I've done it tough and experienced some things that every other woman should do, that I think that flies in the face of humans and how we evolve. Evolution means that we make the next generation is better. It's more nourished. It's we have more opportunity. We're wealthier. And I think that mindset flies absolutely in the face of evolving as a race. So. But I know, again, and I'm being a little bit pedant. I am being very pedantic about this. Women. This is a system issue. So how might we help everyone understand? And particularly, if there's a male leader listening to this right now, how might you use your influence, your power, and your privilege to better understand that women are held to a higher standard than men, and how might you use your voice and that power and that privilege and influence to smooth that out. And some practical examples of that are when, if she is, as we were talking about before, advocating for someone, get her voice heard. I think there's, again, this system issue, this let's all examine our mindsets around women, work, leadership, power, and say, let me advocate for them, but acknowledge that it's complicated and nuanced. Okay. Second topic, and I know that we've spent a lot of time on that one, but 4-day working week, folks. So we've got lots happening around the world, and I've been watching this quietly over the course of this year. So there's been a trial in the UK of a range of companies who have moved on to a 4-day working week, and so it's a controlled trial. There is a movement called the 4-day working week, and increasingly companies are talking about moving to a 4-day working week. The most recent here in my geography of Australia was Unilever, saying that their staff are going to go to a 4-day working week, the 100-80-100 model. I'm less concerned about the model, more concerned about the 4-day working week. And what I'm concerned about is, what might this mean for women? And I don't know yet. Susan?
Well, yeah, something that was unclear to me in the article was, are they talking about 4 8-hour days or 4 10-hour days? So is it still a 40-hour week?
Yeah, so they're saying their 4-day working week translates to 100% of the salary over 80% of the working week, whilst maintaining 100% of the productivity. So they're not squishing 5 days into 4. They're saying, let's face it, what is a working day? It's so variable depending on industry, career stage, yada yada. But yeah, and they're saying one of the enablers, or some of the enablers of that, are slashing less value things like meetings, emails, and I'm wondering. So, number one, my head goes explode. How do you do that at an organisational level? But again, as I said, I wonder what this might mean for the workplace experience for women and the advancement of women into leadership. Don't know.
One of the first thoughts that I have, given that I was first worried, I misunderstood that. So I was first worried about the impacts on women from a childcare perspective if they had to work 4 10-hour days, which would be horrible for women. But even if it's get 100% of the work done in 80% of the time, women are overburdened by maintenance work. I hate the phrase emotional work because it is not just emotional work, but women are overburdened by maintenance work, like, will you manage the team's party? Will you take notes at this meeting? Will you even attend this meeting? And so I see huge potential risks if that factor isn't addressed at a systemic level.
Can you give an example, Susan? Because I'm, as I said, I'm really fuzzy on this, but my spidey senses are going ding, 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 but I can't put my finger on why.
Unless the maintenance work is equally shared across women and men on a leadership team or on a operational team. If it defaults to women, as it always does, it's an impossibility to cut out that low value work and maintain that 100% productivity, because if we are still expected to do the maintenance work of taking the minutes at the meeting all the time, making sure that Joe's anniversary is appropriately celebrated, making arrangements for the team building session, then we will have to put in like 120% of the time instead of 80. Oh, going back to what we talked about earlier about women being nice. And if we start saying no to that less valuable work or that maintenance work, I would project that it would have some additional adverse consequences on women saying no.
No. All good. Mel, Amal, thoughts?
I'm not immediately coming up with a sense of a 4-day work week being a problem. I think problems come in when structure is too rigid to accommodate team members. And let's be clear, we're talking in, I think for the most part, about white collar workers right now. Right?
Absolutely.
So white collar workers who presumably they don't need to do every single task in their job at the same time as their colleagues are completing their tasks. There's some flexibility most of the time. There's some flexibility in when a white collar worker can do their work. And so I just have this sense of if the individuals are doing what they need to do, they're delivering the outcomes that they need to deliver for their role, I don't understand so much why the leadership cares when and where that's happening. So I think the issue for me becomes when things are mandated to employees rather than giving them some kind of flexibility. Because I've seen, for example, so many different arrangements for childcare or with couples that are separated, who gets the children when, and managing that around jobs. There's just not going to be a one size fits all. And for some women, I'm sure some women are celebrating having a 4-day work week. And for other women, they're going to need something different. And that's okay.
I think for me, the danger is that expectation of 100% of the work in 80% of the time.
And so we need listeners to go back and listen to the episode on avoiding office housework.
Office housework, yes. Absolutely. And that's been flashing before my eyes as Susan was speaking. So I think there's the avoiding office housework, and there is a big call to action in there for leaders about the equitable distribution of task. The second piece I want to pick up, Mel, is leading for outcomes. So this is now advice. When we do have to say no, it is going to be about both leaders and workers, people who are reporting to leaders, being clear about what's my positional purpose, what are the outcomes I'm here to lead for, how is this task that you're assigning me regularly, because let's face it, we all get the one-off, but this regular task, meeting minutes, organising the office housework, how is that contributing to taking the business forward? And I feel like it's not fair that I'm getting that and Mel gets the opportunity to generate revenue with customers. So I think there's something really important. One size doesn't fit all. Totally agree, Mel, but we've got to get much, much better about leading for outcomes. And I think the piece around the Unilever article saying, they're thinking about what are the enablers, removing some stuff. Great. As long as it's not moving it to women and giving women less visible stuff to do. Well, we won't do it because we're the important people, but we'll get Amal and Mel to do the meetings and the manage the Slack channel and all that kind of stuff, not visible work. So I'm thinking out loud. I'm forming a view about why I'm feeling so just a little bit wary. I think the principle of people being able to produce the outcomes wherever and however they want is a good one. This is flexible work, but it's the inequity that can arise if we don't pay attention to it. What do you think, Amal?
So I think the only thing that comes to my mind is there's a challenge with, we're working 40-hour days now, 40-hour weeks with 5 days, right? And I probably work more than 8 hours or 10 hours. And if we squeeze that into 4 days, then how long are you going to work? 14, 16-hour days and probably spill over into the fifth day. I think it works in some environments, and that's why it's been flexible where teams get to decide. And there are many teams who work 4 days, 10 hours, and it's just fine. I just don't know that it's for everybody. And I'm not going to say it's going to be more difficult for women. I'm going to say the company has to figure out how to make it work for the different teams that they have, depending on the work that they're delivering for the organization.
Yeah, and I think that's, that Mel highlighted that perfectly. There is no one size fits all. And of course, if I think about the industry that you're in, Amal, the airline industry, well, what are we just going to ground planes for 1 day a week? Or, no, we're not. So, so this is not a one size fits all. But I think
that's kind of happening anyway, right? Because of staffing shortages.
So all
we're already getting a taste of that.
Yeah. So that's great. So thank you for helping me think out loud there and arriving at a more formed view. So because this is the stuff that I get asked about, and no doubt each one of you are asked about. What do you think about? I think I don't really know yet. I need to think about that. So there you go. Okay. So we have had a very robust discussion for 50 minutes about a couple of gnarly issues. Very, very quickly, this is our last episode for 2022, and I'm not going to ask for reflections on 2022. What I am going to ask each of you, though, is what are you hopeful for in 2023? So I think that's a really nice way to finish the year. Susan, what are you hopeful for in 2023?
I feel like I should have some really professional answer, but my answer is I want to get back to Europe.
That's fine.
But on a professional level, as it relates to a career that soars, we're migrating to an entirely new structure because the platform that a career that soars is hosted on is moving into this structure that will encourage even more community and a stronger culture. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm hoping that for a smooth migration and to realize the stronger sense of community and a strong culture that supports the advancement of women, the career development that meets the career development goals and needs of our members and the leadership development needs of our members.
Awesome. Amal, what are you hopeful for in 2023?
Oh my God, do you have time? I have a long list. I think maybe my top two would be more women who have the tools to address the systematic issues that are causing either bias against women or it's not helping advance women. So instead of us focusing on it's women need to scale up or women need to change this, how do we truly address the issues that are in the system, right, within the system? And for more women to know how to have that conversation at work or with their bosses. And secondly, I would say I would want more women to stand up for themselves. You are confident, you are in your position for a reason, you are an asset to the organization and you're driving outcomes. Ask for the promotion, negotiate the salary, go for it. There's no stopping you at this point. 2023 is your year.
Outstanding. Thank you. Mel, what are you hopeful for?
Well, build on our tradition and our goal of seeing more women graciously self-promote. I do want to do a little bit of reflection. So listeners, I want to say thank you for your support along the way because it's been quite a journey this year. And in 2022, I have earned my first true keynote spot at a conference and landed my very first actual paid speaking gig. So I'm pretty excited about both of those. I feel like that's a great step for the work that we do here in a career that soars and lead to soar. So thank you all, and thank you all on this call. For 2023, I'm with Amal. This is your year. It's a year to make stuff happen. There's doors opening. I want to see more women graciously self-promoting. And I am cautiously optimistic about seeing us make some steps forward for women's rights, particularly in healthcare in the US. We took a bunch of steps backwards, and now we've got to try to take a few small steps forward. So that's where I am right now.
I'm hopeful I'm very, very hopeful for women in sport, which of course is my other love. And we have many, many things happening around the sporting world, which absolutely translate into society, because with the work I do in sport, diversity, equity and inclusion in sport, I know that so much of the world will listen to an elite athlete, but they won't necessarily listen to a politician. And I see more and more women and men in sport really advocating for change for women to level the playing field. And I see that as having a profoundly good impact on society and for women's rights. So if you're an athlete, particularly if you're an elite athlete with a platform, I am so behind you, and please keep speaking up on behalf of women and women's rights, because that's what I'm hopeful for. And then for a career that soars, I'm so hopeful, as always, for this platform, for our community. It is unique. It's brilliant. And the members are an amazing group of women who are on the women's team, to use Susan's phraseology from before. And I just want to encourage each one of those women to really step in and step up in this community, because you reap what you sow. And I want to encourage more women to join us, because you've got the four of us here in your corner as your cheer squad, really helping women navigate all of the stuff that goes on in workplaces, in careers, in life, in leadership. And I'm just so hopeful for the impact we can make for women, women's rights and women in the workplace in 2023.
Hear, hear.
So, Susan, Amal, Mel, thank you for 2022. You are I'm just so privileged to have you in my corner, and I hope you know that I'm in yours, and together we make a great team. And I know that collectively we're having such an impact for women. Listeners, this is sayonara, farewell, goodbye for 2022. We will be back. Well, I shouldn't say bigger and better, because I actually don't know what that bigger and better looks like. But anyway, we're going to be back in 2023 with more of these weekly episodes where you can hear advice, where you can ponder matters, where you can ask us questions, but ultimately know that this cheer squad, Lead to Soar, the Lead to Soar podcast, and the Career That Soars community is your cheer squad. So please do tune on in. Happy holidays, everyone. Stay safe, and let's see you again in 2023.
Love it. We're on your team. Happy New Year.
Yeah, hear, hear.
This has been another episode of Lead to Soar, a production of A Career That Soars. You can reach Michelle Redfern at michelleredfern.com and Mel Butcher at melbutcher.com. Join us inside A Career That Soars at acareerthatsoars.com.